The woman was dressed in a pale white robe with a whisk tucked in her arm, the garb of a Taoist priestess. She roamed along the street, peering here and there. Her eyes were bright and observant, as if she were in her own backyard garden and not the Banyue ruins. Strolling right behind her was another woman clad in black, her hands clasped behind her back. The black-clad woman was beautiful, yet cold. Her eyes were piercing, her raven hair long and free, and it was like she radiated chill from her very person. Although she was walking behind the female cultivator, no one would mistake her for a subordinate. These were the same two they'd seen outside the abandoned inn at noon. At that time, they had passed by too fast, and Shilian couldn't make out the details of the lady in black. But he now saw clearly that she was indeed a woman. If the one in white was the state preceptor of Banyue, who was the one in black? The state preceptor swished her whisk leisurely and spoke. Now where did they go? We were careless for one moment, and they all disappeared. Do I have to dig them out and kill them one by one? Just as Shilian thought, they were being watched from the moment they stepped foot into the city. The lady in black approached and stoically said, You can call your friends to help you kill them. By friends, she must have meant the soldiers of Banyue. The state preceptor of Banyue laughed. I don't like calling other people. I like calling you. Aren't you glad? The lady in black ignored her completely and said coolly, There's nothing agreeable about being called out by the likes of you for something like this. Just go. The state preceptor of Banyue arched her brows, but still sped away. Listening to them, it sounded as if they were close. They were no ordinary folks, so the lady in black must be someone of renown. Someone who would be close to the state preceptor of Banyue? A mysterious fellow cultivator? Or was there a queen or general they didn't know about? Shilian was trying to connect the dots rapidly in his mind, but he held his breath. Now wasn't the time to be discovered. It looked like the state preceptor had an unpredictable personality. If she should find them and excitedly summon her legendary 3-meter-tall mace-wielding Banyue soldiers, more time would be wasted fighting them. 24 hours. 1 hour was wasted. 1 hour wasted was another hour they'd sink deeper into danger. But there was no helping this bad luck. Whatever he didn't want to happen would always happen. The lady in black was passing the house Julien had hidden, but stopped mid-step, and her piercing gaze swept over the decayed shelter. The state preceptor of Banyue was already further ahead, but she noticed that her companion had stopped and came back around. Hey, are you coming? The lady in black didn't look at her. You, step back. All right, the state preceptor responded obediently, and actually retreated. The lady in black was about to raise her hand when suddenly a loud rumble blasted from across the street. On the other side, the house Nanfeng and Ashao had hidden in had collapsed. The crumbling of one house led to the entire row to cave in. Dust and sand rolled into the air and clouded the whole street. Within the cloud, a black shadow leapt out and shot a steaming flame toward the state preceptor. But the lady in black rushed forward and shielded her from harm. With her left hand still behind her, she flipped her right palm and easily absorbed the flames before reflecting them right back. The black shadow parried her while escaping and soon disappeared. The state preceptor immediately chased after that shadow, but the lady in black gave the house behind another sweeping look before following. Bless you, Nanfeng, Shilian thanked mentally. Everything happened so quickly, but Nanfeng had no doubt known somehow that they were about to be in trouble and created a diversion to lead their enemies astray. He was the one who'd leapt out, so Ashao must still be inside the collapsed house. After making sure the state preceptor and the lady in black were indeed gone, Shilian dragged Sanlong out of their hiding spot and called out, Ashao, are you still alive? Are you hurt anywhere? A moment later, a muffled voice came from under the ruins. I'm fine. Shilian was relieved. Thank goodness. Although Shilian trusted Nanfeng's ability to control the crash, and that he would no doubt leave enough space for Ashao to stay safe, it was still more reassuring to see it with his own eyes. He raised one of the rotten beams with one hand, and after a moment, Ashao emerged from underneath, covered in dust from head to toe. He brushed himself off a bit, and returned to his stoic expression. Now there are only 3 of us left, Shilian said. Nanfeng is creating a diversion, so we must move faster. Do you know where we can find the Shenyue fern, Ashao? The young man shook his head and said, Sorry, I only know where the city is, but I've never been here before, so I don't know where the fern can be found. Sanlong spoke up. They say the Shenyue fern prefers shade. It's small, its roots thin, but its leaves are big, like a heart-shaped peach. Why not try searching near a large building? A large building? Shilian contemplated. If they were talking big, there was no building larger than the palace. In the legend, it was after the festivities that the queen picked up a shenue leaf, which could mean the fern grew on the palace grounds. The three moved their gaze afar, and in the center of the city there was indeed a palace built of brick and wood. From a distance, the palace had a grandiose aura, but upon a closer look, it was not in much better shape than the dilapidated houses on the streets. Though the palace gates were a massive garden. Through the palace gates there was a massive garden. Perhaps in the past it wasn't a garden but a palace square. With years of neglect, weeds had flourished and spread. Indeed, it wasn't sand beneath their feet now, but mud. This was most likely the last sign of the oasis that once was, and the shenue fern could very well be growing among the other plants. "Let's not waste time," Shilian said. "We only have 24 hours, but keep an eye out for scorpion snakes." Ah Shao and San Lung both hummed in acknowledgement and lowered their heads to start searching through the plants. As they rummaged, it suddenly occurred to Shilian that if the state preceptor of Banyue could control scorpion snakes, there should be an abundance of them slithering about in her territory. Ever since they entered the city, they had not seen a single snake. He straightened up and was about to speak when one of his hands fell on a long object. Looking down, he found that it was a human leg. "Wah!" Shilian withdrew his hand and was struck speechless. It occurred to him that every time he was faced with some horrifying incident, or saw or touched anything frightening in the dark, it was always the other party who would scream before he could say anything. But shouldn't it be the other way around? The plants in this garden were tall and thick, and whoever's leg Shilian touched was someone who had already been hiding and crawling in the weeds. The moment they touched, the leg recoiled, and the weeds in front of him rustled. Someone called out, "Don't hit me! Don't hit me, Gaga, it's me!" Shilian scrutinized the wild grass and saw that the one who emerged crying, "Don't hit me," was thick-browed, large-eyed Tian Sheng. The boy, in turn, saw that Shilian recognized him and sighed a breath of relief. Shilian, on the other hand, wasn't relieved. Rather, he became even more alarmed and raised his good arm in a defensive stance. In circumstances like these, it was more likely that this was an illusion created by something evil. "Weren't you with the others back in the desert? How are you here? Are you really Tian Sheng?" Tian Sheng explained hurriedly, "It's me! I'm the real thing! I'm not the only one. 3 other uncles also came. They're just inside. Look if you don't believe me." He pointed toward the inside of the palace, and sure enough, 3 men came running out. They were indeed the men from the caravan. When they saw Shilian, they froze in their dash and looked awkward. Shilian puffed out a breath before finally raising to his feet and dusting off his white sleeves. "What's going on?" The merchants looked at each other, and no one made any noise. It was Tian Sheng who spoke up after an awkward silence. "Gaga, after you guys left, Uncle Sheng's pain flared up, and he was really miserable. We didn't know how much longer we should wait for you to return, and we were afraid that you guys might have gotten lost. Ah Shao said to go straight to get to the kingdom of Banyue. So we thought the more hands to help, the better. So what he really meant was that the merchants regretted letting them go after all. They were afraid that Shilian and company would rob them of their guide, and after finding the shenue fern for themselves, so they sent people to come follow them. Shilian imagined that Fu Yao couldn't persuade them otherwise, and was probably also too lazy to hold them back. It was impossible to stop stubborn people who refused to listen to reason. Shilian felt rather exasperated. "You're all too reckless. Who knows what there might be and what might happen in a place like this? And you still came?" Tian Sheng knew that if what they'd done made it obvious they didn't trust Shilian, and he felt bad. This was why he didn't make a sound while hiding in the weeds earlier, as awkward as it was. "Sorry, this concerns a man's life, so he couldn't sit still." No matter. This was a life-or-death situation, and to be wary was entirely natural. To go so far into danger for an antidote also proved that they were worthy companions. Shilian couldn't continue to scold them for this and sighed. "If you didn't bump into anything weird when entering the territory, then it's your good fortune. But how did you know to come to the palace to search for the shenue fern?" Tian Sheng scratched his head and replied, "We didn't know where to start, but in the story the red-cloth Gaga told, it was the queen who picked the leaves, right? The queen couldn't possibly leave the palace grounds, so I thought we'd come here and try our luck." Well, this child's mind could certainly spin, and it spun right on target, Shilian thought. Just then, San Lung spoke up from the side. "I found it." Shilian turned to see San Lung striding with his long, lithe legs towards him. In his hand were a few turquoise-colored leaves with roots still attached at the stems. The leaves were about the size of a baby's palm, and in the shape of peaches, slightly pointed at the ends, with thin, tiny roots. Even without Ashao to confirm, Shilian knew without a doubt that this must be the Shenyue fern. Without waiting for Shilian to say a word, Sanlong grabbed his wounded hand and lifted it. The hand that was stung was originally frighteningly swollen, but after Sanlong sucked the poison from the wound, the swelling had gone down significantly, despite it not being fully cleared of the venom. When Shilian's wrist in one hand and the Shenyue fern in the other, Sanlong closed his palm on the plant. After only a second, he reopened his palm, and the fern was crushed into powder without him appearing to exert any force. Sanlong gently but firmly rubbed the powder onto Shilian's hand, and he could feel coolness and relief stinging on his skin. "Thanks, Sanlong," Shilian said. Sanlong didn't respond, however, and after applying the powder, he let go of Shilian's hand. Shilian couldn't help but think the air between the two of them now was really strange, but he didn't know how to ask about it without sounding odd. This wasn't something anyone else would notice either, or something they could possibly understand. "Guga, are you feeling it? Are you feeling better? Is the herb working?" Tiansheng asked anxiously. Shilian snapped out of it and replied, "Much better. It should be the right herb." Hearing this, everyone became excited. "Hurry, let's find more!" Soon, Ashao raised a handful of leaves, crying out, "There's more here!" The Shenyue leaves in Ashao's hand were much bigger and fuller than the small, pitiful ones Sanlong used earlier, but the shape and markings were all correct. So everyone crowded over and happily exclaimed, "There's an entire field here! So many! Pick lots! Let's pick a bunch! Do you think we can sell this?" Noisily, the merchants busied themselves picking the herbs. Shilian turned his head to examine his hand for a moment, then tried to start up a conversation with Sanlong. "You also searched the same area they're in right now, right? Didn't you find any there?" It was obvious Shilian was trying to force a conversation, and after asking the question, he felt that he was rather pathetic. But Sanlong shook his head. "You shouldn't use the ferns over there." "Why?" Shilian wondered curiously. Before Sanlong could answer, they heard someone scream, "Go away!" Everyone stopped, their movements halting. "Who said that? Who's screaming? It wasn't me. It wasn't me either." Then they heard the sharp voice again. "Go away! You're stepping on me!" Only then did the group notice the voice came from near their feet. In a flash, the crowd retreated from that field of ferns. Seeing this, Shilian walked over. He was used to being the one in the lead when it came to these things. He approached the bush where the shrieking had come from and stripped away the thick weeds. Everyone's breathing hitched. Under the weeds, in the mud, there was a man's face. In this field, there was unbelievably a living human being buried in the mud, with only his face showing above the surface. It was a nightmarish sight, truly incomparably creepy. A couple of merchants screamed in fright, holding on to each other. Shilian once again comforted them in a skilled and practiced manner. "Don't panic. Everyone calm down. It's only a face. Nothing extraordinary. We all have faces, no?" The face chuckled. "Oh, did I scare you? I frequently scare myself, too." After reassuring the others, Shilian half crouched and examined the face in the mud. It was a man's face, quite flat when he wasn't smiling, but extremely wrinkled when he was. Shilian couldn't tell whether he was old or young, and couldn't say whether he was handsome or not. He couldn't make much out of the face at all, so he simply asked directly, "Who are you?" The face in the mud asked back, "Who are you?" "We're merchants passing through," Shilian replied. The mud face breathed a long sigh. "Merchant passerby. I used to be part of a caravan too, but that was 50, maybe 60 years ago." The situation just got freakier. Was a man buried in the grounds of an old city ruin for 50 or 60 years still human? One of the merchants shakily asked in trepidation. Then, how did a senior like yourself get here?" The mud face cleared his throat and screwed up his face. I was captured by the Banyue soldiers. I accidentally entered the city. They caught me and buried me here and made me the fertilizer for their Shenyue ferns." No wonder the herbs in their hands were big and full. They were fed with live humans. The merchants immediately dropped all the plants in their hands, feeling as though they were touching corpses. Shilian couldn't help but glance at his hand, too, but he heard Sanlong say, "That one was fine." No wonder that, even though Sanlong had looked through this field earlier, he left it, to pick a small, almost withered fern from elsewhere. He probably saw what was in the soil and guessed that the herbs were grown with human fertilizer, so he ignored the lot completely, and turned around and walked away until he found normally grown herbs in a remote area that was clean of corruption. Only after finding those herbs did he apply them to Shilian's hand. Sanlung was considerate and careful. Thank you, truly, Shilian said. Sanlung nodded his head, but his face was still gloomy. Ever since Shilian was strung by the scorpion snake, Sanlung had behaved like this. A couple of days ago, it was all Guga this, Guga that. But now he hardly called him Guga anymore. Other than sucking poison and applying herbs, Sanlung seemed to be avoiding bodily contact with him as much as possible, and this thoroughly puzzled Shilian. Shilian couldn't grasp what he was thinking, and it was making him feel unsettled. Just then, the Mudface began to speak again. I haven't seen real people in so many years. Can you come closer and let me see you all properly? The merchants all looked at each other, everyone thinking they best not do what he asked. After a while, seeing no one stepped forward, the Mudface muttered, What? What? You don't want to? Oh, what a shame. Why is it a shame? Shilian turned and asked. There's something that's been bothering me ever since you all arrived, the Mudface said, so I wanted to confirm with my own 2 eyes, which is why I asked you to stand closer for me to see. I want to see each and every one of you clearly to make sure. To make sure of what? Shilian pressed. The Mudface cackled. Don't be scared if I tell you. There's someone among you I've met before. 50 years ago. Hair raised on everyone's necks at that statement. If someone met this Mudface 50 years ago, they'd be at least 60 or 70 by now. But among the people present, the oldest definitely didn't look older than 40. So how was that possible? Unless that person wasn't really a person. Shilian gave a sweeping look across everyone's faces, from Ashao to Tiansheng. Some were in shock, some were stricken with fear, some were shaking with anxiety, some speechless and confused. Everyone's reaction was normal and within reason. If one had to pick the odd one out, it'd be Sanlung. But for him, no reaction was probably the normal reaction. Shilian turned back to the Mudface. Who is this person you speak of? The facial muscles of that Mudface twitched, and it gave an exceedingly freaky smile, as if it was giving its all to make itself look more reliable. But it couldn't fully conceal the sinister smirk hiding beneath. He beckoned mysteriously. You, come closer and I'll tell you. Shilian believed him 80% the first time the Mudface asked. But after this, only 50%. Who knew if this monster was only luring them closer to commit some evil deed? Of course, Shilian wouldn't listen to him. He got to his feet and was about to walk away when the Mudface raised his voice. Do you really not want to know who it is? He will kill all of you the same way he killed us. And that's chapter 8.